All right, so we're lucky tonight to have Patrice Carroll, the Strategic Advisor for the City of Seattle Office of Planning and Community Development, to come talk with us again about the 130th and 145th Street Light Rail Draft Plan. We spoke with Patrice a couple of months ago about specifically around getting to the light rail. So this is a continuation of the conversation with Patrice to hear what the city's planning, but also a really important opportunity for us to be able to provide feedback to Patrice to be able to take to the city. So I will turn it over to you, Patrice. Will you be sharing your screen for anything?
Yes, I will.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing mine.
Yeah, so just want to say good evening to everyone and thanks again for joining me. So I'm from the Office of Planning and Community Development. I did want to say that we did work really closely with the Seattle Department of Transportation, and I understand that Chris Saliba was here not too long ago talking about a multimodal mobility that is kind of a complement to our draft plan. It goes into a lot more detail about the kinds of transportation projects and actually looks at a much larger area than what we refer to as the station area. So tonight, maybe we want to, like, since you've already kind of talked with Chris and given him a lot of feedback about the transportation project, so maybe we can focus our discussion tonight on some of the other things that are in the plan in addition to the transportation projects. I thought I would just share the draft plan video with you in case some folks haven't seen it or it's been a while since you've seen it. So that runs about like 8 minutes or something like that. And then after that, we'll just go directly to your questions. So let me share my screen. It says host is disabled participant sharing. Can you like undo that, Karen?
Let me see if I can do that. Somebody else made me the host and I don't think she's on here anymore. Let me
see.
It
says that you're the host.
Okay, I changed that. Advanced sharing options.
Okay, it looks like
she has it selected as only the host. Is it like on YouTube?
Make her a co-host.
Make her a co-host?
Okay, can you make her a co-host?
Okay, let me try that.
Actually, do you guys see that now?
Oh,
is that,
yeah.
Can you guys see the screen? So yeah. It did work. Yeah. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to start this now.
Welcome, and thank you for joining this online open house for the 130th and 145th Station Area Planning. The draft plan is ready for your review. I'm Patrice Carroll, Community Development. This video is about 10 minutes long and provides an overview of the process and the plan. The purpose of the 130th and 145th Station Area Plan is to guide decisions for public and private investment near high-capacity transit stations. The plan outlines land use, mobility, and investments to support a regional vision for integrating fast, reliable transit with compact, walkable communities for generations to come. The station area refers to the area surrounding and the area that is most accessible to new stations. The area within a half a mile, about a 10-minute walk of the 130th and 145th link stations, and within a quarter mile, about a 5-minute walk of the 145th 15th Avenue Stride Bus Rapid Transit Station. The station area includes parts of Pinehurst, Holler Lake, and Olympic Hills neighborhoods. The launch of our planning process in March 2019 at Ingram High School seems like a lifetime ago. In September 2019, we gathered for a community workshop at the North Seattle Church of the Nazarene. And over the past 2 years, we learned a lot about your neighborhood through these events, but also conversations at local community meetings and events. Lately, we've relied on newsletters, social media, streaming video, and online surveys to share information and gather your feedback. We still have more work to do, but this draft plan is an important. The plan is organized into 5 sections: vision, how we live, how we move around, where change could happen first, and how to make change equitable, especially as we consider the needs of Black and Indigenous people of color. Topics such as land use, housing, station access. The plan covers 11 important topics. For each topic, we have a goal. What future long-term outcome we want. We have strategies, what actions the cities or others can take in years to achieve our goals. And we have early actions. What can we do soon to move things in the right direction? For each topic, we've also included a highlight of a program or a recent policy. We selected highlights based on the relevance to this station area and issues and opportunities identified by you. For example, we heard more daycare. Daycare U explains recent changes to the land use code. It's easier to open a daycare center. Unfortunately, we can't yet host an event with you in person to talk about the draft plan. We continue to rely on digital strategies to get the word out, share information, and gather your feedback. Our website, emails, we're also mailing out flyers to 3,000 people who live near the station. If you can help us spread the word through your social networks, please do. Let's take a look at what vision. It brings together your hopes and dreams for your community into a brief statement that guides the goals, the strategies, and early actions to follow. 130th and 145th station area is a lively, walkable, and welcoming North Seattle neighborhood. Major streets have roomy tree-lined sidewalks and other green infrastructure. And bicycle infrastructure makes everyday trips to transit stations, schools, and neighboring urban villages enjoyable and safe. An array of housing offers options for income and lifestyles, and small shops and cafes near the station cater to locals, commuters, students, and visitors. Local and citywide lovers of nature, recreation, and culture treasure the abundant green spaces and the unique cultural events so easily reached by walking, biking, or transit. The proposed goal for land use is a vibrant, compact, and connected neighborhood surrounds light rail and bus rapid transit stations. Strategies encourage multifamily housing, pedestrian-oriented retail, incentives for community amenities and services, reduce parking requirements, buffering sensitive natural areas, and more detailed studies for the station area, and promoting more local daycare. The pink areas highlighted on the map are generally the areas we are proposing to include in more detailed zoning and environmental studies. We're also considering changing land use policy this year, 2021, for a 1 block near the station. That's the block with the dotted red line. The proposed rental and homeownership options in transit-rich areas serve individuals and households across a broad range of incomes, household sizes, and ages. Strategies encourage housing partnerships with small institutions, community-based land ownership, missing middle housing types, accessory dwelling units, and ground-related housing. The proposed goals for urban design and livability. Station area residents can easily access high-quality community amenities and services. The neighborhoods surrounding the station have distinct identity, high-quality public realm, and well-designed buildings. Strategies encourage sufficient capacity for community facilities, access to private facilities, community services near stations, wayfinding to stations, opportunities for distinct community identity, design guidance for new development, and great street design. The proposed goal for natural environment. Healthy, attractive, and sustainable open spaces for new residents and provide multiple benefits to a growing community. The station area has healthy and resilient tree canopy. Strategies encourage more community access to park golf course, connectivity between green spaces, job training, natural drainage, support for green space volunteers, tree planting, and education about tree regulations. The proposed goal for station access. People experience safety and convenience when walking, bicycling, and taking transit to future light rail stations and bus rapid transit. Strategies encourage advancing the 18 recommended projects in SDOT's multimodal study, coordination with other agencies, and identification of funding opportunities. The proposed goal for neighborhood mobility, future transportation investments complement future land use changes. Strategies encourage coordination with connections to community destinations, and greenway networks. The proposed goal for parking in the station area is minimized to encourage walking, biking, and transit use. Strategies encourage the alternative use of an existing park and ride lot, a community parking study, and discourage commuter parking at community parks near stations and new park and ride lots. The proposed goal for opportunities. Key sites catalyze change to achieve the community vision. Strategies encourage monitoring key sites, facilitating partnerships, and sharing information. The proposed goal for affordable housing. People of limited means and marginalized populations have affordable housing opportunities close to light rail and bus rapid transit. Strategies encourage partnerships with religious institutions, affordable housing promotion through local schools, partnerships with Sound Transit and the Seattle Housing Authority, rent-restricted accessory dwelling units, maximizing the potential on affordable housing development sites, and education around notice to sell and community support for affordable housing development. The proposed goal for displacement mitigation. Current residents and businesses can afford to reap benefits of enhanced transit service. Strategies encourage monitoring displacement risk, community preference policy for affordable housing, technical assistance for displaced businesses, and capacity building for community organizations. The proposed goal for access to opportunity. Residents have excellent access to regional education and employment opportunities. Strategies encourage replication of Seattle Housing Authority's Creating Moves to Opportunities program and a promotion of the station area as a high opportunity area. Throughout this process, there was much discussion about the future of the Jackson Park Golf Course, preserve it in its current use, or think about new uses. Changing parkland to other uses would be a major shift in citywide policy and beyond the scope of our station area plan. But we included some strategies for expanding community uses at the site. We hope this video has piqued your interest in the draft plan. After reading the plan, you may also want to review our frequently asked questions or submit a question. Please take the survey or just email us your community organization would like to host a discussion about the draft plan. We're happy to participate. So what's next? This year, we'll review your comments and make changes. Land use change for the one block nearest to the station. Sound Transit this year that could affect our timeline for future work. Future work to implement new zoning for the station area. That process will include zoning and environmental studies, a legislative process to consider and approve new zoning. SDOT will be advancing the 18 multimodal projects identified in their study. Fall to the city to implement, but the community has a role too. Achieving the vision will require the community to continue the great advocacy, stewardship, and community building work you are already doing. But this plan suggests some new rules and opportunities. It's not too early to be thinking about housing, and especially affordable housing in the station area. And as new development comes to the area, How will the community engage with developers during the early community? What community-led projects can be funded by the Neighborhood Matching Fund, participatory budgeting, or other new initiatives? We look forward to your help and participation to continue to shape the station area in coming years.
Okay, so I was going to ask Karen if you would like to help moderate the questions. If it's a small and you want to just unmute people and they can ask their question directly, or another option is to use the chat to have people put their questions in the chat. So I'm open to whatever works best for this group.
Yeah, I'm totally fine if people want to unmute themselves and ask a question. I guess it's set on here. People have to ask to be unmuted, it looks like. So if you have a question and you want to,
so maybe they could.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe they could raise their hand, you know, so that they can, and then you can see who needs to be unmuted.
Yep, that works.
Yeah, and in the meantime, while you're thinking of your questions, I'll just say, we did have a survey that was online. We actually have closed that survey, but and the reason we closed it was just because we thought that responses might change as more information from Sound Transit is released. And so we kind of wanted to have like a point in time survey. But people are still welcome to send us their comments. As I said in the presentation, we're not intending to finalize the plan until late year. So yeah, so still plenty of time to send us your ideas.
All right, looks like Andrew Tate has a question.
Yes, hey there. Thanks, Patrice, for your time. I live on Meridian, pretty close to where the 130th station is going to be. So super excited for that. I'm just curious how the city decides upon or even promotes incentives for developers that will form into the goals and visions that you talked about.
Yeah, so that would be something that would be part of the zoning study. We used to use what we call incentive zoning. We used to use that as a way to encourage affordable housing, for developers to include affordable housing in their projects. They get more density if they include affordable housing. But now that's mandatory. So all developers have to, of multifamily development, because of our mandatory housing affordability, that's kind of built into the base zoning. So our incentive zoning is still a little bit in flux, but that's certainly something that we'll talk about in these more detailed zoning studies. Some of the other tools we obviously the biggest tool we use to that would come into play here is the funding that the city offers through our housing levy or through other leverage funds and federal programs where the city partners with affordable housing developers. And the Office of Housing has made sites near light rail stations a priority. So when they're putting out an application to affordable developers to apply for that kind of funding, part of the prioritization of those applications will include, proximity to light rail transit.
Looks like we have a question from Sean. He asks, hi Patrice, this is in the chats. Hi Patrice, what do you foresee for the potential zoning at the early action site to the east of the 130th Street station?
Yeah, so initially we were thinking that we might do some rezoning there this year to sort of demonstrate to Sound Transit how committed the city is to transit-oriented development. But we've actually decided to hold off on the zoning. So what we're thinking of now is maybe just doing what we call a comprehensive plan amendment. In areas where there's single family zoning, we actually have to go through a two-step process. And the first step is to adjust our comprehensive plan and change. There's a map and the category, we would have to change the category on that map from single family residential to multifamily residential or mixed use residential. So we're still thinking about taking that step this year. We haven't made a final decision about that yet, but the zoning, actually, we want it to be part of the full package for the station area because there's some other things that come into play that could affect that zoning. And again, we've heard from some people that they'd like us to look at some very dense zoning in that site, and just zoning it as a single block would probably not really, it would not allow us to kind of explore the full range of options that people might want to see on that site. I can say just from in the area, the kind of existing zoning that we see in this area is the densest zoning is mid-rise zoning. And so there are some areas, especially near the 15th Avenue and 145th bus rapid transit station, there's already existing mid-rise zoning in that location. So I'd say that's probably like the high end, that might be the high end of what we consider. And so that would be like kind of 8 or 9 story buildings. And in most other places, the existing zoning in this area is more like 40 feet or 55 feet. So buildings not quite that tall. Sweet spot in Seattle, for those of you that follow new development, is typically buildings that are wood frame buildings that are like 5 or 6 stories over a concrete base. So that seems to pencil out very well in Seattle. So that's always a development type that would also be considered, yeah. But no high-rise buildings, but I want to, and some people did express concern that we might be suggesting high-rise buildings like they're seeing in, the university district or something. And I think high-rise is not something that we would be considering at this location.
Patrice, what do you consider a high-rise?
That would be those would be steel and concrete buildings, probably starting, 10 or 12 stories. That's generally what puts it in the high-rise category. So.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Brett here. Hi, Patrice. Are there preliminary designs for walkways within Jackson Park and North Acres for the inevitable foot traffic increase through/around these parks?
Yeah, so there were certainly some projects that were in SDOT's multimodal study where they, and again, a lot of this was driven from the feedback that they heard from communities. So the design work on that is just beginning. Now that their study is finalized, they're going to be looking at those projects more closely and testing the feasibility, coming up with some, very rough cost estimates for those projects. And then they'll probably be getting more community input. Once everyone has more information, that might also affect what projects people prioritize. So that process is just really getting underway. So no, there's no designs yet.
Oh, I'm on mute. I'm sorry. We got lots of good questions coming in here. Hi, Patrice. Are there any plans to develop North Acres Park land into anything else? This question's from Jill.
Now, this is the same as what we said about the Jackson Park Golf Course. I mean, changing uses, changing parkland to some non-parkland or non-recreation use is not a policy that the city has right now. Our policy is to preserve the parkland that we have. Right now, I'm not aware of any work being done to change that policy. And then if there are changes like of uses within the park, that's something really that the Department of Parks and Recreation would lead. And I'm not aware of any discussions about North Acre. You know, there have been some discussions about the Jackson Park Golf Course, and particularly when it comes to some of the trail improvements or perhaps providing. I know that the Parks Department told me that they did have the golf course was open for walking and some passive use during the pandemic. And obviously, because we had a lot of snow this year, it was also open for snow sports this past winter as well. So I think that's kind of a live discussion with Parks and Recreation. So I think that is something that they're thinking about. That's something that I will probably come up again. They're going to be doing some strategic planning for the Parks District this year. So I expect those issues will be, you know, yes for Jackson Park Golf Course, but I haven't heard anything about Acres.
Doug writes, I'm not up to date on the status of the 130th Street station. Is it on the same schedule as the 145th station, or is it still in the limbo state?
So it is not on the same schedule as 145th. The 145th station was approved earlier. So that was part of what we call the ST2 package. The 130th Street station is an infill station, and the package, the ST3 package that we all approved was that Sound Transit would come back later and build that station to open in 2031. There was some acceleration of some of the design work because they wanted to explore the possibility of building the 130th Street station as part of the Linwood Link, but no construction has been approved. They're still finishing up the design. Had some opportunity. I think they're going to be doing some more outreach in the fall to finalize the design and the public art and all the other kind of components. The timing is really, there's this bigger issue that Sound Transit's grappling with now that they call state realignment, because they don't have enough money to build the ST3 package that they promised the voters because of lost revenues during the pandemic, because of extremely high land costs, much higher than anticipated, and also some project costs because of the cost of materials and things like that. So they are going to be delaying some of those ST3 projects, and we don't know yet what those delays will be. The board right now is scheduled to make that decision in July. So that's a very live discussion right now about how much delay we might see for the 130th station. But the Linwood Link and the 145th station are going forward. And as you all can see, that construction is just flying. So I think they are on schedule, and, you know, we hear that it's all going to open in 2024.
Thank you for explaining that. NW writes, Roosevelt is very dangerous. People speed between I-5 and Aurora open ditches and no sidewalks. Why doesn't the plan include sidewalks and speed bumps and better lighting for pedestrians?
Yeah, so the way sidewalks get built in Seattle is when there's new development. When there is new development, that development includes what we call the public realm. And we have lots of regulations and rules and guidance for how that public realm gets built out as the part of new development. Department of Transportation generally doesn't build many. There's very little money for that. So really that's how most of the new sidewalks that you see being built in Seattle are generally part of new developments. SDOT, their sidewalk work is often limited to crosswalks and kind of more constrained places. So that's a big challenge. And in a lot of the neighborhoods in North Seattle that we would like to have be walkable neighborhoods. So again, this is an issue right now. That's the policy. I guess that policy could change in the future, but our plan didn't anticipate a change in that policy. So there will be some improvements very close to the station. Sound Transit actually provides some funding for what they call station access projects, but those are generally, within a block of the new stations. So when the station gets built, you would see those improvements as part of the station construction. But there aren't any improvements in this area planned as part of the Guyway construction, and that's what you're seeing now. There will be some improvements near the 145th station, particularly around the intersection of Fifth Avenue. One other improvement that you will probably see earlier, you all noticed that Fifth Avenue is closed off and Sound Transit is using that as a construction staging area. And so in exchange for the use of that space, they will be repairing any damage to that street and kind of rebuilding it. And one of the things that they will add as part of the rebuild is a bike lane.
Thank you, Patrice. I just remember when SDOT was speaking with us a couple months ago about getting to the station, they made it really clear that they did this study and there was all these ideas of ways to help people get to the station and where pedestrian safety is needed, but there wasn't any funding for any of it. So
yeah, and that's part of the next, and that's part of the next step as well. And and then there's always the trade-off, with limited resources. Do you go for like one big project or do you try to do more smaller projects? So those are the kinds of conversations I think SDOT is going to come back to the community to get your input on in the future.
All right, Brett writes, I believe I heard something about a neighborhood matching program in your video. Can you elaborate on how this works and how other neighborhoods have taken advantage of it?
Yeah, well, you all probably know more about that than I. The Neighborhood Matching Fund, I'm sure that Holler Lake has had projects and submitted applications. So maybe, Karen, can you give us an example of a local project in your area that was funded through the Neighborhood Matching Fund? Or maybe someone in the audience?
Yeah, I could, or if any other board member does. We got an award probably 2 summers ago. So 2 summers ago, we did the smaller of the 2 and it's a $5,000 fund to repair some decaying floor in the Holler Lake Community Club. And so we prepared an application for that, and the city paid for half of the cost, and then the funds of the Holler Lake Community Club paid for the other half. And then there's a larger grant that's much larger. I think it funds up to 40 or 50,000 matching grant. The smaller one is on a rolling basis. So there you can kind of apply anytime throughout a specified time, whereas the larger one there's 2 or 3 times per year when you can apply. They're pretty specific in there about what
Yeah.
about what you can and can't do regarding SDOT and traffic safety. We did reach out about that before, and you have to have somebody from SDOT look at the project ahead of time and tell you if it's something that would be possible or fundable or even something they would consider. But you can do traffic related things.
Yeah, and the neighborhood matching fund that's managed by the Department of Neighborhoods. So, so always good to know who in the Department of Neighborhoods is the contact for North Seattle. And I don't know if you guys currently know that. I think it's not positive. But I do want to flag that. I believe that the Department of Neighborhoods is kind of looking at all of those programs, because there's a number of different programs and it can get kind of confusing, which program you can get for which kind of funding. And so I know they are looking at perhaps reorganizing some of those funds to make them easier for communities to access. And then there's also, in the budget that was approved this year, there was also something called participatory budgeting. And so that is a program that is still being designed. It probably won't be up and running until 2022. But the idea of that program is that there's a chunk of money from the city's budget that just gets set aside for community identified projects. And those could be different kinds of capital projects, which then the individual departments would manage and implement. So for instance, if there was a park project, that money would then go to the Parks Department, so they would have the budget to implement that project. So it's kind of like, it's almost like a community earmark, like you get to earmark some funds in the budget for projects in your neighborhood, and it'll be competitive. So that'll be a competitive process as well. But that's one to keep your eyes on, because the amount that was set aside in the budget was fairly large, larger than the neighborhood matching fund. Yeah.
All right, Sean writes, with a lot of the station areas being immediately adjacent to I-5, has there been any discussion about things that could be done to mitigate the impacts of the interstate on future development?
In our noise walls, so you'd have to look at the sound transit plans too. But generally, the noise walls were replacing walls that were already there, there to mitigate the freeway noise. And then the aerial alignments include, in the design of those, there is some noise mitigation to mitigate the noise from the rail facility. I think that in our zoning, we will probably look at things like, do we want to include some extra setbacks in some of those areas so that the development be set back a little bit more from I-5. So yeah, so that's certainly an issue that we'd like to explore in the zoning studies.
So we have one more question here, and I just want to encourage anybody, if you want to provide any feedback to Patrice as well, in addition to asking questions, which are great, please feel free to raise your hand or put your feedback in the chat as well. I know she's looking for feedback from the group as well. Andrew writes, will there be any design review board for new development?
There already is a design review board that reviews certain developments that are above a certain threshold. And so, yeah, so new developments would be subject to design review the same way they are now. There wouldn't be a different design review process for projects in the station area.
Celia writes, talk more about setbacks.
So setbacks can happen at the ground level. In some places, there are development controls that are put in certain zones. Primarily, we have something called a pedestrian designation, and that kind of anticipates intensely pedestrian environments. So we might require the building to set back more than our typical development project. There's also setbacks at the upper level where we might use those setbacks where there's to create more air and light, or in this case, again, it's not something that we've studied yet, but that might be a strategy to reduce noise to some of the units that might face the freeway or the light rail. So when a building kind of steps back a little bit, where the upper stories are set back from, some buildings go like straight up from the street level all the way to the top. Some buildings get set back after that first story, the first or second story, and then the upper stories have a little bit smaller.
I'll ask a question on.
And I did want to say, I know. Yeah, I was just going to say, if you still, I'm not sure if you still have a land use committee.
We have a land use chair.
Does the Holler Lake Community Club do? Yeah. So if what I know that what some community organizations do is they sort of, they kind of delegate to their land use committee, and then that group kind of digs into the details, and they might send us a letter or some of the things that they might like to see, or make sure that we're thinking about for either the next steps or certain policies that maybe they don't see in this plan that they'd like to see in this plan. So that could be an option for the Holler Lake Community Club as well. You could use your land use committee, who's a little bit more like in the details of that zoning world, that zoning and land use world.
I'll ask a question just on behalf of some neighbors that are not here, that are not keen on the development, keen on zoning. And so can you just walk us through a little bit more about what that may look like? I know there's, some folks that live on Meridian that are concerned about zoning changes up as far as even Meridian. What kind of timeline would we be looking at something like that to potentially see rezoning there, and who all would approve or sign off on something like that? Is that just who makes that decision?
Yeah, so we really haven't. Yeah, so the rezoning process. So we would, let's say we finalize this plan, and let's assume that Sound Transit decides they're going to build, all the stations. They're going to build that 130th station, BRT station, pretty soon. So we would scope out some alternatives to like be studied, and to meet the environmental regulations. In Seattle, we have to do what they call an environmental impact statement of those. So it goes through all of the environmental impacts. In recent years, we've also looked at some other issues as part of that process, things like displacement, or what these changes might do to affordability of the remaining housing in the area. So we've kind of gone a little bit beyond the usual environmental topics that we're required by law to study. Do this very detailed study. There's some very sensitive environmental areas, so I assume that will also be studied in detail. And then based on that study and all of the feedback that you give us as part of that environmental review process, we would come up with a proposal. So, and it would include zoning, it might include some mitigation. You know, I'll just say, for instance, like, oh, we can't build here because it's too close to the wetlands, so we need a bigger buffer. And then that will gets approved by the mayor, and then the mayor will send that legislation to council, and then council there's a legislative review and approval process. So people will delegate it to one of their committees. They'll delegate it to their land use and neighborhood committee to, again, dig into the details of that. They'll hold a public hearing. Sometimes they hold more than one hearing or more than one meeting, and then they will perhaps make changes to that proposal. They may send it back to us for more work. But eventually, when the council committee is satisfied with that proposal, then they will make a recommendation to the entire council, who will then vote to approve that legislation. And then that will, and that action is used. So that new zoning. So it's a long process. I mean, just the environmental studies and the legislative process is at least a 2-year process. And often longer.
Thank you for walking us through that process. Go ahead.
Yeah, and generally, you know, we in place at least 3 years before a station opens. That in the past, this may change. Our new reality, but in the past, that's when we've generally seen the real estate industry respond to a new station. So for instance, in Shoreline, although there has been some townhouse development a little bit further away from the station, it's only now, 3 years before, that there was just a big announcement about someone acquiring, you know, some of the parcels that's very close to the station. So it's only now that they've acquired land and will probably be pursuing that entitlement of that property to build a multifamily project, very close to the 145th station in Shoreline. So usually we like to have that zoning about 3 years in place. So that's when we have a little bit better idea. So certainly if the 130th station is not going to open until 2031, we've got a lot of time. If there was a possibility that it was going to open earlier, which was why we wanted to accelerate some of the planning to be ready for that in case they did decide to build that station earlier.
Okay. Thank you for walking us through that process. It's helpful to understand. Sean has his hand raised here, so I'm going to ask you to unmute, Sean.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Patrice.
Hi, Sean.
I was just going to ask if you've got any sense from the city about loosening zoning up citywide. I know there's been a lot of conversations around that, and I'm curious if that factors into your planning at all. I mean, I know this is focused specifically to this area, but I know there's been a lot of conversation, not just in Seattle, but elsewhere about zoning and allowing more apartments elsewhere in the city. Have you heard anything about that from? I haven't seen anything officially from the city, I guess.
Well, probably will soon. We have something called the comprehensive plan, like I referred to that earlier. That's kind of, you know, particularly where we have single 2-step process. And so I think that the comprehensive plan is due for an update. And so we expect that to be one of the things that people are talking about. Some of the council members are very interested in having that conversation. And again, yeah, this has been in other cities, you may have read articles where they're loosening up some of the restrictions on single family, allowing more than one unit on some of those parcels, and just even like changing the name of it, because frankly, we already allow more than one unit on single family parcels because of the ADU, because we allow up to, one unit and two accessory dwelling single parcels of a certain size. So single family doesn't necessarily capture what we actually allow on those parcels right now. So at a minimum, I think there'll be some language changes, but I think there will be a robust discussion about, and particularly in like some strategic locations, like around light rail stations. But yeah,
Sure.
yeah, so stay tuned for the comprehensive plan update, which will launch either later this year, like in fourth quarter 2021 or first quarter 2022. And that is a plan that we're required to, excuse me, that's a plan that we're required to complete that update by June of 2024 by statute. That's part of Washington State's Growth Management Act.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have Andrew here who writes, Patrice mentioned existing zoning along 15th may lead to early projects. Patrice, I don't know if you want to respond to that before I read the rest of the question.
I think on Fifth, are you talking about on Fifth Avenue where the red dotted block? Is that what
you showed the dark brown and you said there were already some higher density zoning on 15.
Oh, the existing zoning, yes. Yeah, do you know what the States is on 15th Avenue? The apartment complex?
I think so.
Yeah, so that parcel, and then there's some parcels that are that front right on 145th are the dark brown, and that's the mid-rise zone. That's mid-rise zoning there, yes.
So the rest of his question, which I think is really, really interesting and thought-provoking for me, he says, possibly a question for Karen. How is Holler Lake collaborating with other neighborhoods across I-5 to envision the future of the neighborhood? And to be very honest with you, Andrew, we have not done any collaborating with Pinehurst or Olympic View or Hills. Is it what Olympic? What is the name of that neighborhood? I don't even know what it's called.
Olympic Hills.
Olympic Hills.
Olympic Hills. Yeah.
I remember several board members were at a meeting where we looked at the whole area that even crossed I-5. But I'm glad you asked about this because to be honest with you, I think for a lot of us, I-5 is such a big divide between the two sides, east and west of the station and the neighborhoods that I don't, to be honest with you, know that it's really even crossed our mind to try to work with the folks living on the other side. So I think that's definitely something we can do and reach out to I think Pinehurst has a neighborhood group or association. So really thank you for the question and prompting that thought.
And I think there was some collaboration, but it was really focused on Sound Transit's decision-making during the ST3 process. Some of the history of that, the draft proposal that came out for ST3 did not include the 130th station. It was included as what they call a provisional station, which means they kind of showed it on the map, but they didn't budget any money. So there was a lot of lobbying, I believe, across North Seattle. Some groups came together to persuade Sound Transit that station should be included in the final proposal that went to the voters, and it was included as an infill station. So good work, North Seattle.
So Celia asks, are trees considered sensitive environmental resources?
it's the technical term in our land use code is called environmentally sensitive areas. Environmentally critical areas, and trees alone are not. But we do have regulations that do apply to trees, and actually those regulations are under review right now. The Urban Forestry Commission has been championing those changes for a while. I haven't gotten an update on those, but again, it's their goal is to strengthen the regulations private property, which would apply to, just like your neighbor cutting down some enormous, beautiful, healthy tree, but also for the development community when they redevelop sites. There would be some stronger requirements about saving existing trees. So that's something that's certainly in your neighborhood where there is such beautiful mature tree canopy. That's something to keep your eye on.
Thank you. NW writes, I feel sad that our neighborhood of modest houses is about to be ballardized out of existence with the higher density zoning. NW, thank you for sharing your input. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, I can respond. I mean, I think a lot of the development that you see in Ballard was not single family houses that got torn down, right? It was a lot of parking lots and one-story commercial. And so I think keep that in mind, and a better, a better place to get a sense of how slowly this change might happen is looking at some of the single family areas near the Columbia City station, or like, some of the areas like away from the commercial area near the Mount Baker station, but not so much. I mean, I think that the redevelopment happens a lot more quickly and a lot more substantially when it happens in those kind of underutilized commercial areas where you have a lot of surface parking. And also the parcel sizes are larger. Obviously, we're really interested in any place wherever you see a big parking lot near a light rail station. So obviously one of the things that we've been looking at is the church property that's right across the street from the station, because that's obviously much prefer to see housing in that lot than a parking lot right across the street from a light rail station. So that's something that, those are the kinds of places where we would expect to see change more quickly. But again, the single family change in single family neighborhoods, it's really the owners control that. So, and that tends to evolve and unfold much more slowly. We did see in Shoreline, there were some neighbors who I guess were at the same stage of thinking about theirs, and they decided to join together and sell at the same time to a developer, so that a developer didn't have to, they kind of assembled those parcels for themselves. But that's, that's quite unusual. We don't see that often. Usually the developer has to like hold properties for years trying to assemble a site that large. So yeah, so those are some of the things, but that's what I would say. Look at the way development is happening in some of the less intensely developed areas. Like Ballard is not a good example. Roosevelt is probably not a good example, but maybe some of the places, Beacon Hill, Columbia City, those are better places to look at to get a better feel for how the single family areas might change.
Thank you, Patrice.
And they stay very, and they'll stay very mixed for a long time. Yeah. On Capitol Hill, there's still many blocks that have a mix of single family houses and small apartment buildings. So, but it's important. I will say it's not too early to start thinking about what places you think would be a good fit for your neighborhood, because that's definitely in this next stage of work, that's definitely an exercise that we'll go through. And whatever the best way for you guys to communicate to us, what kind of change you would like to see. It's good to just like start like, oh, well, that's so bad, or gee, those townhouses that's a pretty nice, or the things that I like. So.
Thank you. Dawn and Debbie write, do you think 145th and 130th will become like Greenwood with mostly townhomes and apartment buildings? Have there been studies that address that?
I think this Greenwood, again, I think if you're talking about the commercial district, I think that a lot of those apartment buildings and townhouses were built on replaced single-story commercial developments with surface parking. I'm not sure, but generally, that corridor along Greenwood has had commercial zoning for a long, long, long time. And yeah, so I don't know specifically every transition in Greenwood, but again, yes, I think that the kind of change that we're likely to see around transit is, think of it as a continuum, and like the tallest and the densest buildings are the ones closest to the station, and then maybe stepping down to some smaller buildings, and then maybe stepping down to some of these, what we call missing middle housing, like fourplexes or triplexes, and then maybe small lot, single family. That's another tool that we have, is even having, like, as a transition, using what we call small lot residential, which means rather than in your neighborhood, a lot of single family that's on 10,000 square foot lots. So instead of having, 10,000 square foot lots, those lots could be several, foot lots, that kind of thing.
Okay, thank you. Dawn and Debbie did write in the chat they were homes. I guess at one point they're thinking of they were homes.
Okay. Yeah.
So Andrew writes, with the new mayor coming next year, are there any plans / policies from your department that are set in stone, and any of the vision that could change at the new mayor's direction?
Again, the draft plan is pretty high level. So there's definitely like some flexibility in there in how that policy or how that vision would get implemented. And yes, the next would have influence, because again, that's kind of the first step in our legislative process, is that, the mayor has to decide if this is a policy that they want to forward to council. That's how it works in our strong mayor city. So yes, so the next mayor would weigh in on whatever recommendations or whatever proposals are developed.
So Brett asks, along the lines of Andrew's question about collaboration, how is Seattle communicating with other cities up north as the rail is developed? I feel like the upcoming stations between Northgate and Alderwood are largely in residential areas. Is there a larger Snow King plan for development so that no single station area is overdeveloped?
There are, again, there's regional policies, and I would say that the regional policies are very similar to ours. But each local municipality has has a comprehensive plan. And so they have, again, their plan is based on a certain amount of growth that's all agreed to within King County. We have a King County Planning Council. And so that's kind of where the distribution of growth is kind of firmed up. And again, that's going to be part of the comprehensive plan update process because we're all on the same. But then specifically, like how much growth they might encourage around a light rail station versus in places really up to the local municipality. So there isn't that level of sort of more countywide or regional collaboration around that. But there's some other incentives that certainly has policy in our regional plan that prioritizes growth near light rail stations, and they are kind of a little bit of a gateway to transportation improvement dollars. So all of the local governments in King County and in the region would want to demonstrate how they're meeting those policies. But I would say there's a pretty consistent policy framework in, Everett and Linwood and all of those places. Those suburban communities have a little bit of a different context, so their plans are going to look different than ours. And again, a lot of them are building, very dense transit-oriented development in places that were like former shopping centers. So again, I think there they had a lot of commercial uses and a lot of underutilized commercial not be impacting single family areas as much.
I have another question. I don't see any more in the chat or any hands raised. And I don't know if you're the right person, but I wonder if you've heard any talk about this. In thinking about our station, that I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's probably less busy than if we think about something like Westlake Station or even Capitol Hill, just because there isn't the density of people to get off and walk to it by foot or whatnot. How does that impact what's done from a public safety perspective and security at the station? Have you heard any conversation about that? If there's fewer people around?
I think that would be Sound Transit did talk about that, the safety, and obviously they got a lot of questions about safety and security in their engagement about, so I would go back and refer to their, to the results of their community engagement. I'm not really comfortable speaking for Sound Transit, but that was obviously a topic in their station design, whether some stations are open or some stations are gated, and how they handle elevated stations versus underground stations. So I think that's, and again, they will be doing more community engagement. So that's great questions and things to keep in mind. Particularly, I would assume they'll probably have a lot more detail in their landscaping plans, and so you'll see what kind of lighting and where the lighting is going to be. So so that would be an opportunity for you to kind of raise some of those issues again.
Okay, thank you. All right, are there any other questions or comments for Patrice? We have about 10 minutes left remaining. If there's anything left anyone wants to talk about or ask about.
Yeah, and I will say we do get a lot of questions about, what does it mean if I'm in the pink area, or so it means you want to stay connected to this process. I also want to be very clear, there's often confusion about what it means to have your property rezoned. It does not mean that the city is planning to acquire that property. That property is yours and you control it. You decide when you want to sell. You decide if you want to continue to live there for the rest of your life, or if you want to hold on to it and rent it, or give it to your children or your grandchildren. I mean, that is like entirely up to you. And again, oftentimes that redevelopment happens when the property owner is making a change, right? They're moving, they're downsizing, they're doing something else. So it's hard for us to predict like how fast things will change, because again, there's so many parcels and so many individual owners making those decisions. It's very different than if you have the big lot and it's only one owner, right? That can happen very quickly. But when you have a lot of 6,000 square foot or 8,000 or 10,000 square foot parcels, with people, it's based on their needs, and that the pay will be quite different.
All right. Well, thank you, Patrice, for joining us tonight and sharing all your knowledge with us, answering our questions, and reaching out about this meeting. And thank you, everybody, for your questions. And do you have something to add, Patrice?
Yeah, and I was just going to say, and we would love to, have sort of obviously individuals can send us their comments and suggestions, but it would be great if the Holler Lake Community Council could do that as well, because again, that is kind of more representative of a group of people rather than an individual. So we'd love to have that as well to guide us as we move forward.
Okay, great. We'll definitely take that back to our group and discuss that. So anyone on the call, please, if you have to add, please send it over. So, all right, everybody have a great night. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.